So I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you're memorizing the exact blueprints of this like high-end gym.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right, and you spend months just studying the complex biomechanics of every single muscle group.
Like total textbook immersion.
Exactly. You invest in the top-tier breathable workout gear, you optimize your pre-workout nutrition down to the absolute gram, and you can flawlessly explain the physics of a deadlift to anyone who asks.
It's like you're ready to go.
Right. But then, after all that exhaustive preparation, you never actually lift a single weight.
Oh, wow.
You just keep studying. And the crazy thing is, in the modern era, we are doing the exact same thing, but with our deepest, most profound beliefs.
We really are. I mean, we've never had more access to theology, philosophy, and spiritual wisdom. It's all right there in our pockets.
Yeah, you can stream a world-renowned sermon while you're literally just waiting in line for a coffee.
Or, pull up centuries of complex theological scholarship while you're sitting on the bus.
Right. But we're facing this massive paradox. We are acquiring all this knowledge, we're filling our heads to the brim, and yet it is completely failing to produce transformed lives.
It really is the central tension of modern spiritual life. Because the greatest threat to actual growth right now, it isn't ignorance.
Right. It's not a lack of access.
Exactly. It's unapplied knowledge.
Right.
We're dealing with this incredibly dangerous gap between acquiring information and experiencing actual formation. You get the data, but the data never actually compiles into a new way of living.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive today. We're looking at a comprehensive text called Integrating Doctrine and Life, and we are going to explore how to actually bridge that massive gap.
Because nobody wants to just have a crowded mind.
No, of course not. I mean, you're diving into these sources, you're seeking out this profound knowledge, presumably because you want it to lead to authentic, holistic transformation.
Right. You want the truth you're learning to actually make a mechanical difference in your Tuesday morning staff meeting.
Or, when you're stuck in gridlock traffic.
Exactly. Or when you're navigating a brutal family crisis. If you look at the historical and biblical vision of discipleship, learning was never, ever intended to be a purely intellectual exercise.
Right. It was designed to be the engine for a completely transformed life.
Yeah. But there is this quiet, subtle drift that happens over time. The intellect expands, the vocabulary gets sharper.
But the character remains entirely untouched.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this psychological deception because it is so easy to fall into. I mean, when you listen to a profound lecture or you finally grasp a really complex concept, your brain actually gives you a little chemical reward.
You get a dopamine hit.
Right. You feel accomplished. And the danger is that we mistake the mere comprehension of a virtue for the actual possession of that virtue.
That is a brilliant way to frame it.
Like, we think because we understand the mechanics of patience, we are suddenly a patient person.
Right. You confuse the dopamine hit of discovery with the hard, slow work of transformation. And, what's fascinating here is that this actually isn't a new problem. It's not unique to the internet age.
Oh, really?
No, think about the Pharisees in the first century. They are the ultimate archetype for this exact disconnect.
Oh, yeah. The experts of the law.
Right? They were absolute masters of intellectual theology. They had meticulously studied the law, memorized these massive sweeping portions of sacred texts.
And could debate the nuances with, like, laser precision.
Exactly. They had these terrifyingly efficient hard drives of data.
But their output was completely broken.
Completely.
Yeah.
Jesus repeatedly rebuked them because despite all that data, their hearts were entirely calcified.
Wow.
Their religious knowledge was vast, sure, but it lacked the basic mechanics of compassion, humility, and genuine love for other human beings. Their theology was completely detached from their humanity.
They were passing the written test, but failing the actual workout. And there is this incredibly vivid warning about this exact cognitive dissonance in the book of James.
Oh, James chapter 1.
Yeah, James 1. It talks about a person who hears the truth, but doesn't actually do what it says. It compares them to someone who looks at their own face in a mirror, clearly sees what needs to be fixed, and then walks away and immediately forgets what they look like.
It's a profound psychological insight, really. Because
Yeah.
when you engage with deep foundational truth, it acts as a mirror. It reveals reality.
Right, it shows you the stark contrast between who you currently are and who you're called to become.
But if you just walk away and do nothing, if you don't change your habits, your tone of voice, your priorities, you enter a state of self-deception.
Because you get this false sense of maturity.
Exactly. You feel mature just because you stood in front of the mirror, even though nothing about you actually changed.
So If hoarding information isn't the goal and just staring at the mirror isn't working, what should the actual framework for belief look like? Like, how do we structure this? And actually, let me play the skeptic for a second here. Because when we start using a word like doctrine to fix this, it can sound incredibly cold.
It really can.
Right. Doctrine sounds academic. It sounds like a dusty, rigid list of rules we're supposed to memorize for a pop quiz. Why does doctrine even matter for someone's daily, ordinary life?
That is the default modern reaction, isn't it? We hear doctrine and we instantly think of a cage, but we need to radically redefine that word.
Okay, how so?
Doctrine isn't a cage of rules. It is the actual load-bearing architecture of your faith. To really visualize this, look at the profound metaphor the Apostle Paul uses in Colossians chapter 2.
Okay.
He uses this brilliant dual imagery. He says believers need to be both rooted and built up.
Oh, so two totally different visuals, a biological one and an architectural one.
Exactly.
But wait, let me push back on that first part. Isn't that roots idea just a really convenient way to justify a purely private, invisible faith?
How do you mean?
Like someone saying, oh, I don't need to actually go out and help the poor or be patient with my coworkers. I'm just working on my internal roots right now inside my own head. It sounds like an excuse to do nothing.
And that is exactly why Paul doesn't stop at roots. It's an excellent pushback, and it's the exact trap people fall into. If you only have roots, you just have a stump.
Right. Just a stump in the ground.
Think about the mechanics of a massive tree. The roots are entirely invisible, hidden deep beneath the soil, sure. But they are doing the vital mechanical work of drawing in hidden nourishment and providing structural stability in high winds.
So in this framework, the doctrine is the soil.
Yes, it is the hidden internal formation of the mind.
Yeah.
But Paul immediately counters any excuse for private isolation by shifting to that architectural language, being built out.
Because the structure is highly visible.
Exactly. It rises above the ground. It takes up space in the real world. That building represents the outward expression of your faith, your character, your ethical choices in the workplace, your tangible service to your neighbors.
Ah, I see. So the roots are the deep, quiet convictions you hold in your mind, and the building is how you actually treat the barista when they get your order completely wrong.
That's a perfect way to put it. You literally cannot have one without the other and still call it a functional faith.
Because without deep roots, your faith is incredibly fragile.
It's a tree planted in 2 inches of topsoil. The moment a storm hits, a massive cultural shift, a devastating personal tragedy, or even just a new ideological trend on social media, you are completely blown over because there's nothing holding you down.
But on the flip side, without the building, your faith remains a purely private, invisible, and ultimately useless exercise.
Right. It might bring you personal comfort, but it does absolutely nothing to heal or help the world around you.
And we can see the perfect historical application of this in the early church, right? Like right in the book of Acts.
Oh, absolutely. Acts chapter 2 is basically the blueprint for this.
Yeah, these early Christians weren't just sitting around in elite discussion circles debating abstract theories about the universe. Their devotion to the apostles' teaching their deep roots instantly and mechanically flowed into visible, radical action.
They didn't hesitate. They immediately started sharing their meals, liquidating their assets to practice radical generosity.
And praying together.
Right. Their theology didn't just stay in their heads. It instantly became their culture.
Because they understood that the two things are entirely inseparable. I mean, understanding the mechanics of the resurrection naturally produced abnormal physical courage.
And grasping the doctrine of grace naturally produced radical generosity with their wealth. The doctrine was the architectural blueprint, and their daily communal life was the actual skyscraper rising from it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I want to drill down into the actual mechanism of this change. How does this actually happen?
Let's dig into it.
Let's use a tech analogy. Moving a theological concept from your head down into your hands is basically like a massive system-wide software update for the human brain.
I like that.
We aren't just talking about downloading a shiny new app like deciding you're going to volunteer at a soup kitchen once a month. We are talking about fundamentally rewriting the human operating system so that the person processes the raw data of reality completely differently.
That is the exact mechanical shift Paul describes in Romans chapter 12. And the linguistic pivot he makes there is fascinating.
Set the stage for us.
So for 11 dense chapters, Paul has been writing this heavy, mind-bending theology. He's covering justification, predestination, the wrath of God, the mechanics of grace. It is heavy, heavy academic lifting.
Tons of data.
Right. And then at the start of chapter 12, he uses one word, Therefore,
The ultimate hinge of the entire letter.
exactly. Therefore, signals the shift from the theoretical ledger to the physical inventory. Because of all this profound theology, therefore, offer your physical bodies as a living sacrifice.
Wow.
And the explicit mechanism he gives for this physical transformation is entirely cognitive. He says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
So the mind is the absolute battlefield of human transformation.
Yes. You do not change your long-term behavior through sheer white-knuckled willpower. Willpower always depletes. You change your behavior by allowing truth to fundamentally redefine how your brain perceives the world.
Right, it rewrites the code. I
Yeah.
mean, in the default human operating system, success is measured by accolades, money, and climbing over people to get visibility.
Sure.
But when the mind is renewed by doctrine, the code changes. Suddenly, success is measured by faithfulness and integrity, even if nobody is watching.
Exactly. In the old OS, power is all about dominance, leverage, and control. In the renewed mind, the definition of power is radically inverted to mean service and stewardship.
You're looking at the exact same world, the exact same office politics, the exact same family dynamics, but the code interpreting that data has fundamentally changed.
Look at how this played out historically with Martin Luther. This perfectly illustrates how explosive this cognitive shift is.
Oh yeah, tell us about Luther.
So Luther was a monk whose internal operating system was running on pure legalistic dread. He had all the theological knowledge of his era, but his brain was wired to view God as a terrifying, punishing ledger keeper.
He was paralyzed by the biological fear of his own failure.
Exactly.
So how did the doctrine of grace actually rewrite those neural pathways of fear for him? Like, what was the mechanical shift?
It shifted the burden of performance.
Mm.
The legalistic OS says, I must perfectly achieve my own salvation, and if I fail, I am destroyed.
Which is terrifying.
Right. But the doctrine of grace rewrote that to say, the standard is already perfectly achieved on my behalf by Christ.
Wow.
When that specific theological puzzle piece finally clicked into place for Luther, the biological paralyzing fear of failure literally evaporated. It wasn't just a tweak to his academic use.
It completely deleted the fear virus from his system.
Yes, and that internal cognitive renewal freed him up to physically stand in front of an empire and refuse to back down.
So his external courage was just a symptom of his internal doctrine.
Precisely. Transformation began in the quiet of his mind, but it reshaped the geopolitical landscape of Europe.
Okay, this software update makes perfect sense when we're talking about historical giants or, when you're sitting alone in a quiet room meditating on scripture.
Right.
But human brains are wired for social survival. How does this new operating system handle the sudden introduction of a hostile virus?
What do you mean by a hostile virus?
Well, it is incredibly easy to feel spiritually transformed when you are reading a theology book. It is a lot harder when you are suddenly CC'd on a deeply passive-aggressive email from Steve in accounting, who is actively trying to take credit for your 6 months of hard work.
Yes. Steve from accounting.
Right. How does doctrine hold up under that kind of petty, infuriating friction, or worse, when you face a devastating, inexplicable personal loss?
Well, this raises an important question, and it is the ultimate crucible. Theology is completely theoretical until it is relationally tested.
Yeah.
A renewed mind isn't proven by how much internal peace you feel on a yoga mat. It is proven in the messy friction of community and conflict. Think about the biblical fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control.
Those are not just private, warm, fuzzy feelings.
Not at all. They're highly active relational ethics. If you truly mechanically understand the doctrine of your own profound forgiveness, it must short-circuit your desire for petty revenge when Steve from accounting throws you under the bus.
Right. And resilient doctrine is what allows people to face unimaginable suffering, not as random, meaningless chaos, but as refinement. Let's look at Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
An incredible example.
We always talk about how brave he was to stand up to the Gestapo, but let's talk about the actual mechanics of his theology in that prison cell. He wrote extensively about the doctrine of costly grace. What exactly is that, and how did it override his biological instinct to just survive at any cost?
So, costly grace was Bonhoeffer's counter to what he called cheap grace, which is the idea that you can accept forgiveness without it requiring any actual change or obedience in your life.
Like getting the dopamine hit without the workout.
Exactly. Costly grace is the understanding that while grace is a free gift, it costs Christ his life, and therefore it demands the entirety of the disciples' life in return.
So that rewrote his OS.
Completely. Because Bonhoeffer's mental operating system was running on this specific doctrine, his very definition of life changed. Biological death at the hands of the Nazis was no longer the ultimate threat to him. Unfaithfulness to Christ was.
That profound cognitive shift is the only mechanism that produces that kind of abnormal physical courage in a freezing cell.
It's the same psychological mechanism we see in someone like Corrie ten Boom. She survived the absolute horrors of a Nazi concentration camp where her sister died.
Yeah.
And yet, years later, she came face to face with one of her former guards, and she extended her hand and forgave him.
That is absolutely not a natural human reflex.
Not at all. That is an unnatural, incredibly difficult response generated entirely by a mind that has been aggressively rewired by the doctrine of Christ's forgiveness.
Or Mother Teresa physically washing the rotting bodies of the destitute in the slums of Calcutta.
Right, driven by the doctrine of the Imago Dei.
Yeah. The belief that every single human being is made in the very image of God, that mechanically drove her hands to care for people the rest of the world had discarded as garbage.
These aren't just inspiring stories. They are the ultimate historical proofs of doctrine tested in the crucible.
Yeah.
Their theology wasn't abstract poetry. It was the absolute bedrock that sustained their sanity and their ethics in the darkest places on earth.
Which brings the lens squarely back to us. I mean, if a deep understanding of doctrine can sustain Bonhoeffer in a Gestapo prison, how is it sustaining you in your daily life?
That's the real question.
Right. How do we actually run this diagnostic on ourselves without feeling completely crushed by the standards set by people like Corrie ten Boom? So what does this all mean for us?
We need a practical approach.
Yeah, think about the framework of a spiritual audit. Look, if you want to grow your finances, you don't just hope for the best. You ruthlessly audit your spending. If you want to advance your career, you audit your daily habits.
You have to intentionally audit your spiritual growth.
Exactly. But an audit isn't just a polite checklist. An audit is actively hunting for discrepancies between the ledger, what you claim to believe, and the physical inventory, how you actually act under pressure.
Yeah, that is the perfect way to describe the friction of a discipleship roadmap. It is a deliberate evaluation of specific domains in your life to find those discrepancies.
So what are those domains?
First, are you actively renewing your mind through daily engagement with Scripture? And I mean, not just skimming it for comfort, but allowing it to aggressively challenge your deeply held assumptions.
Right.
Second, are you forming your character through intentional spiritual disciplines? Things like fasting and daily gratitude.
Let's elevate that idea of fasting for a second, because honestly, it sounds so ancient. Why does fasting actually disrupt the old operating system?
Because fasting introduces intentional, controlled physical friction into your life. It aggressively denies your biological drive for comfort and consumption.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, when you fast, you are mechanically proving to your brain that your deepest sustenance isn't physical food or immediate gratification. It literally rewires your dependency.
And gratitude does something similar.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Daily, forced gratitude forces the brain out of its default evolutionary mode of anxiety and complaint and rewires it into a recognition of God's sovereignty. You are building the hidden roots.
Right, aligning the ledger and the inventory. But the audit doesn't stop at your own internal biology. It moves to the visible structure.
Building.
Yeah. Are you expressing your faith through actual inconvenient obedience? Are you actively seeking the good of your neighbors or just yourself? Does your spiritual growth actually make you a more encouraging, patient, and hospitable person to the people who live in your house?
And the fail-safe for this entire process is maintaining a posture of continual learning. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 5 reminds us that the wise always add to their learning.
Which means actively hunting for your own blind spots.
Yes. It means seeking out mentorship from people who are further along the path and, crucially, remaining humble enough to accept critical feedback about your character without instantly throwing up a defensive wall.
Because the moment you think your architecture is completely finished, you have stopped growing and started decaying.
Exactly. It is about deliberately, painstakingly connecting your theological ledger to your everyday living, closing that massive gap between the information crowding your head and the actual formation of your life.
As we wrap up this deep dive into these sources, I think it is absolutely vital to remember that the ultimate goal of all this study, of reading theology and listening to deep dives like this, isn't just to make you the smartest person in the room.
No, not at all.
It is to make you whole. It is about building a visible architectural life on a foundation of truth that can actually stand firm when the inevitable storms hit.
When your roots are driven deep into the mechanics of the truth, Your life becomes a visible, enduring structure that actually provides shelter for others.
I love that. I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over today, building on this idea of living a truly visible faith. I want you to imagine for a second that your daily life, your patience when you are cut off in traffic, your generosity with your coworkers, your immediate visceral reactions to stress and disappointment. Imagine that your actual physical life was the only theological textbook someone else ever got to read.
Wow.
What exact doctrines would they learn from watching you? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Let your roots grow deep today.